So, all right, everybody, happy Thursday, August 22nd. Welcome to our monthly jobs report and inflation update. My name is Albert. I am the founder of Albert's List, and I'll be your host today. And with me co-hosting is Colin Moe, who is our trusty admin and moderator of this chat, as well as occasional commentator, and also Dr. Reilly White, who is the Associate Dean of Teaching and Learning and the Associate Professor with tenure at the University of New Mexico, who is our fearless leader and joins us monthly to talk about the state of the market. As all of you know, it's been topsy-turvy and it's been crazy. And today we're going to get some news on that and, separate the reality from the hype. Before we get started, this is being recorded. Feel free to use the webinar chat and the Q&A. And, we've also started a webinar poll here that asks how people feel about the state of the economy. 45% have said that it's terrible and they're strongly pessimistic. 40% feel that it could be either or. And there are 3 people in today's webinar who feel like they are having a lot of hope and they are strongly optimistic about the future. Wherever you may be, you are welcome here and you are welcome to ask questions and learn more. And without further ado, Dr. White, over to you. We are excited to hear what you have to say.
All right. Thank you so much, Albert. Thank you so much, Colin. Thank you so much, Albert's List participatory team, joining us here at an inconvenient 5 p.m. time for you, probably, if you're dialing in from the West Coast. But I'm so grateful that you're here. Let's rock and roll and talk about some of the economic shenanigans that we've seen this week, not least, of course, the job revision that came into play. As always, I'm so grateful to see some of our repeat offenders who join us here. It's so good to see you, Marcia. Good to see Jill. Good to see other folks here as well. Melanie, who have come here before. I'll do my best to answer some of the questions that we have here. If I miss any questions or you have other questions apart from this, feel free to just put this directly into the chat window here, because I am monitoring the chat window. It is incredibly amusing to me. Yes, every mention of shenanigans. There's going to be a lot of them. I hope you filled out your Reilly bingo cards here on Albert's List tonight. We're going to be talking about shenanigans because that's what we're ultimately about in this month's inflation rodeo and monthly jobs report. Heavy key on jobs because we've got some interesting data here. Whoops, actually the 22nd predated yesterday. One of the other economic conspiracies at play. Let me just change that real quick for the people in the cheap seats. So let's get into the jobs report. Let's rock and roll. So in the jobs report from last month, the news did get the essence of this right. What an incredibly disappointing situation to be in. I know. Thanks, Albert. I really tried very hard to convey the mood of the jobs report as it stands on the image generator. And nothing says this, even though this is clearly Albert's List, as it says San Francisco Bay. Oh, and it's not a evening economics session without Aaron coming into town and rocking and rolling and providing, of course, some expert commentary himself. So if I'm unavailable, ask Aaron anything. He's sort of he's a secondary deity in the world of economics. So let's talk about this one. So July 2024 jobs report, here's the deal. So for the first time, everyone kind of had this wake-up call. We had a fear that it was going to continue going downhill. We know that the economy in the last few months, especially in the last year really, has been one that has been slowing down, not recessionary, but one that fundamentally is slowing. We know the labor market was getting tighter. But this job market, we're going to talk first about these numbers and then about the annual revision numbers that came out, which were just fascinating to look into. Only 114,000 jobs added to the overall economy across the country. Now, depending on your view on this, is this a good number or a bad number, or what is a fair number? So if you believe we're in a relatively low immigration environment, 150,000 jobs would be a decent number, 200,000 even better. If we're a high immigration environment right now, and I think one aspect of the economic situation that we've seen in the last couple of years is that the immigration numbers have been underestimated, and this has led to a boost in the economy. It's helped us, improve our economic situation, but at the same time, it's also limited our overall ability to actually reflect accurately on what a jobs number should be. And if you're in a high immigration economy, you're looking for $250,000, $300,000 jobs. If 300,000 jobs per month, sustained by the population growth you're experiencing. So we're not there in both categories, and it's not pleasant. Unemployment rose to 4.3%. Now, Albert puts there in the chat window something interesting. So Claudia Sahm is a pretty, really, really competent, really famous economist. And she came out with something called the sum rule, which is a informal sort of, not informal meaning that it is considered a recession indicator across the market. Basically, the idea is when the 3-month average US unemployment rate rises by 0.5% or more over its 12-month low, a recession is underway. Now, look around here. Is there a recession around us? Not yet, and we can't really justify it yet from where we are statistically, academically, economically, or even just because we no longer feel the heralded warmth of the fire of economic growth like we did before. We are not in a recession because a lot of our other recession indicators don't show us that we are there. But it is a warning sign. States had previously hit the sum rule over the last few months, and it is a sign that our labor market is weakening. But again, take everything in aggregate and use common sense whenever possible. Is the 4.3 unemployment rate horrible? No, but it is worse than it was before, which is bad news bears. Albert says, is there a Reilly rule somewhere? Reilly's rule is, man, don't make any absolute firm prediction on the economy because it will always make a fool of you. So my best is trying to, so I don't have many good rules to say. I do rely on the same things a lot of the other people do. And I've actually never met Claudia Sahm, although she used to have a pretty active Twitter and hasn't been online in some time, X, in that respect. But, and she came back online to kind of address some of the sum rule questions. But very insightful economist with years of experience at the Fed. And she's part of a sort of a brain trust of really smart, relatively younger economists who are out there. I'm very much on the outside. People don't invite me to their parties. Oh, this is fun. That's fun. This is good. I can't see the chart presentations. Oh, that's interesting. How are you guys seeing? Can you see the July 2024 jobs report? Is it sharing? Is it not sharing? What do we got here so far? Okay, good. So I can see it. Sorry about Jamu. I don't know. Cool. Okay, cool, guys. Thank you for dialing in on that. Just wanted to be sure. One reason I do it this way instead of sharing screen, we've had some back and forth instead of making in presentation mode, either because of my ginormous monitor that I'm operating on or for some other reason. It doesn't share that well and it makes it much smaller if I use presentation mode. So what I do is I try to do it this way so you guys in the cheap seats can do it. Maybe you're sitting down in a spacious, 150 square foot Redwood City apartment, looking at this thing and trying to match it to your, 4x5 screen that you're trying to watch and trying to make out the numbers. But it's perfectly, I appreciate wherever you're dialing in from. In this case too, so we've got unemployment numbers that are higher. We've got jobs numbers that are lower than anticipated. But where have we been adding jobs? And I'll give you a hint. It ain't the information sector. So we've added 64,000 in healthcare, 25,000 in construction, although some recent indicators have suggested this is likely to fall off given that we've seen multifamily construction take a little bit of a dive in the last couple months. So I expect the construction numbers to start falling off a bit. Another 23K in leisure and hospitality. Now add 17K in government overall. None of this is individually disappointing, but it is weaker. But I want you to notice that in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, nearly half of all of the sectors in the economy, they show job losses. Now that is, we've gone from an area where we had some areas of concern, like the information sector has always been a source of concern over the last year, now 20,000 jobs lower. And now we've spread across the markets to about half of the sectors in the economy being effective, which is really an interesting development for us. Normally the negatives on this chart, there are fewer of them. Here, they're basically, we break even. And we've got 6 sectors that are completely underwater. And that's only slightly different than the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 sectors that are above water. So it's something that we have to watch in careful detail. Now, we lost in information. We lost in educational services, all the fun things like information and education. So party time down at the at Harvard Yard. We don't have enough of that. Labor force participation increased slightly to 62.7%. What's participation? That's the ratio of the number of people of working throughout our, actually, not even just of working age, including older folks, above the age of 16 and over, who either have a job or are looking for a job, divided by the total size of that labor force. This number has been trending lower, but we have to keep an eye on that as well. And this is interesting too. The number of people not in the labor force who currently want a job increased by 366,000 to 5.6 million in July. So in other words, if you're not in the labor force, we don't count you as part of the unemployment metrics. But if you are in the labor force, if you are not in labor force, but you also felt the survey and say, well, maybe I'd like a job, but there's not one available for me, so I'm not going to take one. That number of people has also increased as well. Also, bad news bears. And so Colin says, Cisco employees should be brushing up on their resume. It's pretty brutal cycle. Oh no, Cisco wants higher productivity, swindling widows and orphans. No, I'm kidding. To juice up the numbers, but employees are now not aligned because they worry about layoffs, which means Cisco will probably see worse productivity, leads to more firings. It is a cycle. This is interesting. So when companies let go of workers, it can have a couple of effects depending on the nature of how it's done. Strategically, many companies hope or imply that perhaps by letting off workers, they can hit their bottom lines, and it's just a straight line, naive calculation. But as Colin points out, there's a lot more variables at play. Morale drops across the company. People say, wait a second, if they took, Frankie or Janice, they're coming for me too. And so I got to watch out for this. And as a consequence, it does have morale effects. It does have issues that extend beyond any productivity gains that may be gained, or any efficiency gains that may be gained by firing them. So, oh, terrible things. So this is good. Oh, Jamu, or Jamu. What is the restating of 800,000 jobs? We're going to talk about this. This cycle is the most corporate startup world. Here's that, Christina. It absolutely is. Albert says, I contracted at Cisco back in 2011 when they lost 10% of the company. Oh my goodness gracious. Fascinating. Gosh, good story shared here. Also correct. So Melanie, that's Melanie, unintended genius comment. One thing that we do poorly at all, right? So we're only as good when we make decisions as managers or as other people. We're only good as the information that we have at hand. We can't do more. And if information is poor, one thing that companies have been particularly bad at is measuring productivity, right? What that means, measuring what is adequate for productivity, and then trying to determine from that information, saying, and making productivity decisions in the absence of all those secondary and tertiary effects is pure whimsy, and it's tough to do. And I can go in and rule in finance, be right or wrong, but be confident. So you can go in and be like, oh yes, if I just lay off these 3,000 workers, it'll be great. We'll hit our bottom lines, and Cisco will be popular, and everyone's going to wear Cisco shirts. And Cisco, the musician, the rapper, is going to come back in importance just because of association with our name. It's never going to be that way. Brett says, or have a measure ounce of empathy unless it's a shareholder. You're right, too. Empathy is not something that's taught enough in corporate boards. It's a big deal. And as a consequence, your organizational culture is highly dependent on the decisions you make as a manager and executive. So all of these good incentive. So let's talk about this. Jen asked about this. Let's talk about the Great Revision. 818,000 fewer jobs than reported over the last 12 months. So wait a second. So we're all here reporting jobs numbers. I'm here reporting it like it's my job, as if it kind of is my job. But in that sense, we monthly, every month, the Bureau of Labor Statistics revises the jobs by each month. And in addition, each year, they go in and do a grand revision where they establish and say, well, here's all the other financial data and economics data that we had to talk about. And as a consequence, we have more data available now. We've done better surveys. We've controlled for aspects that we weren't sure about. And so they produce a more robust, hopefully more accurate number that reflects things as it stands. Now, here is where the trickery and whimsy and tomfoolery engages in. this thing, I have true belief that economists operating in this space, because of the data, the payroll survey that they utilize is very robust. When they ask firms and they ask individuals in one survey, they ask firms in another survey about the information around this. But at the same time, other compounding economic information forces adjustments. The scale of this adjustment is indeed historically large. 818,000 is indeed the highest amount of correction that we've seen since way back in 2009, which you remember 2009, I had a completely different job. Actually, I was a banker through 2008, and then 2008, everything was on fire, and I went, oh, I should be an academic. And then I went to get my PhD. But in this particular case, the revisions are wide. They're across a number of sectors with a number of different issues. So let's talk about this first. So positive revisions. Oh, there's more people in private education and health services than we thought. Yay. Short, individualized, lonely clap in an empty auditorium. However, most disappointing, and probably for this audience, something that will surprise you least, is of the 818,000 fewer jobs, 358,000 were in professional and business services, an overarching thing that includes your accountants, your business service professionals, a lot of white collar workers out there in the field doing all number of things to support businesses. As Jimmy says, bam, white collar jobs, 358,000 lower. So you went out with your college education and your fancy degrees, and you said, wait a second, these jobs report sunshine, rainbows, unicorns. This isn't happening for me. You're right. As it turns out, 358,000 is a huge number to correct this by, and especially in one sector. It is really, really extraordinary and perhaps unprecedented, but I have to do the research on that. Manufacturing, 115,000 fewer. Trade, 104,000 fewer. Information, down 68,000. Financial activity, 76. And finally, leisure and hospitality, a boom sector post the COVID-19 pandemic. Also had to be revised down 150,000 for the year. And so good link here from Aaron too, that breaks this down in a little bit more detail too. And, looking at this, the benchmark revision, to put some percentages there, professional and business services, that's down 1.6%. That's a huge, huge revision. Information down a full 2%. Overall, the size of the economy. So if you're sitting there in the back of the room saying, Reilly White, I told you so, this is the time. So Dr. White, this validates everyone feeling being gaslit. We can all say I told you so. I felt everything has been very odd about this market, but it is something that is done, I still think, ethically within the context of data collection, but it has just been a factor of we're only as good as the data that we have. And as we can see, sometimes our data ain't too good. Colin says, I'm actually curious why private education and healthcare is put together. No, it's really information here as well. Total private, when we private education and health services, that's a really good question. So, obviously you've got, such a huge number of things. Healthcare and social assistance are part of that, and educational services are another. Broadly speaking, services, but at the same time, you can broadly call them a similar factor because they perform a societal service. But beyond that, I don't know. Timing of Jackson. Jimmy says, very suspicious timing of the jobs data, Jackson Hole, shenanigans, tomfoolery. What's going on here? It is interesting. One of the things where they were a little bit late in releasing this, like minutes, I don't know, or hours or whatever it was. And so people are all like, it's never good news when there's a delay. And indeed, it hasn't. So if we go back to how revisions have looked in the last and this goes back to 2006. So the last 18 years or so, we have to go back to 2009 to see a downward revision of this magnitude. And even then we had an upward revision in 2006 that was high, not and a little bit less positive than this particular negative magnitude was. And then most of the time, these revisions aren't anywhere near this in scope or scale. I came across also we had a downward revision this time last year. I forget if we talked about it, but it was much smaller, to about 300K or so. So it's a big, big deal. Oh, the revision in context. Look at that too. Good image, good link from Aaron. For those of you in the cheap seats who can't view it, Let's see if I can do this here. Here's what it is here. Basically, the question was the total number of jobs that we had. We're dealing at the question of, do we have 158 million jobs or 157 million jobs in the economy? It doesn't seem that significant, but it is, of course, in nature of all the things that the human experience relates to, which are changes and other things. It doesn't mean that the economy is in shambles. Indeed, over the long run, it has shown that the aggregate number of jobs has increased, but our benchmark just ended up being substantially lower than where we thought it was before by a factor of 818,000. Huge number. Interesting stuff. I wouldn't say it's completely fake. It's a lot of people look at this and they say, oh, this is fake news. And, there are these things that go out with this. I mean, economics is never loved by any particular person. And if you're a child, you never dream of being in finance or economics unless you're diabolically deranged or you have, have other compounding factors. But one of the things that we have to be real careful about, as it depends around these things, is economic data is a key component in decision making. And we do have a lot of studies that dictate how things should work and if things are right or not. So this is also interesting. So what does this mean from an economics point of view or a jobs point of view? Albert asks, what do you think Powell will say tomorrow at Jackson Hole about this? He just can't gloss over some robotic Fed speak. I have a complete faith in Jerome Powell's ability to Fed speak his way through this. I think if anybody, I think he can chat GPT this in a way where he can do this. I suspect he'll continue to open the door for rate decreases. And the question is, in September at the Fed meeting that they're holding next, are they going to make a cut, and how significant will that cut be? The markets right now, where it shapes up right now, are saying there's a 26% chance of a 0.5 percentage cut and about a 74% chance the rest of it that'll cut it just a little bit. And the other notes from the news is this is not like a 180 that the Fed has done. So Jerome Powell's the Fed chair, but remember, the Federal Reserve is divided into 12 different districts across the country. And so these, it was designed over 100 years ago. And actually, I'll show a map of this for you because you should all know it. Let's see, Federal Reserve districts. You'll notice here, let me grab a quick map for you guys here. There it is. There's our geographic boundaries. Boom goes the dynamite. So take a look at this. Obviously, this was designed where economic power was 100 years ago, not currently. That's why the entire West Coast is just District 12. There's no District 13. Ooh, conspiracies. But we've got District 1 all the way through 12. 1 is essentially just New England with the exception of Fairfield County, Connecticut. 2 is just New York. Pennsylvania, obviously, split between 2 different federal districts. And so there's a sense of this is where the economy was hanging back in when these districts were designed in 1913. And so since that time, each of these, of course, has a different governor attached to it, whether the San Francisco Fed or the Kansas City, Dallas, Minneapolis, Chicago, Cleveland, etc. All those cities have fed regional chairs who in turn form this rotating committee that vote on whether to lower or raise the discount rate. The discount rate is just overnight lending to big banks, but it has the ripple effect on the rest of the economy. And so for us, when we look at the Fed and they make these decisions, where we want them to cut rates because that incentivizes economic growth, it makes a lot of stuff cheaper, it makes money cheaper to lend, it makes investing in stuff cheaper. And when they raise rates, they try to control inflation by reducing the money floating around in the economy and making it more expensive to lend. And in the last minutes that were released in their last meeting the prior month, there was more than one of these regional Fed chairs that says, hey, maybe we should cut now. I am certain that the Fed now, in lieu of the economic news we've received, are going to cut rates. The question is how much and in what trajectory. And I want to also remind you all that even if they cut rates, it's not going to be an overnight thing. We're not going to wake up tomorrow and be like, oh, Cisco hired 8 million workers and we're all going to work their new plant that they're going to build in Reading. It's never going to work that way. Because one of the issues is, of course, it's like steering a battleship in the economy. We can lower the rates and that does build the potential of future economic growth. But there is going to be a time, and it's not going to solve anything overnight, and it's not going to bring back jobs overnight, but it will improve the economic trajectory. And whether that means keeping us out of a recession or building some economic growth, empowering some economic growth in the future, that remains a big question. Albert says, Colin says, wouldn't 12's economic output dwarf most of the others? Yeah, Colin, why can't we do a weighted vote on this too? 12, everybody, let's do this. Let's rock and roll. Yeah, Albert says, how did they determine the size of these markets? The fourth district is so tiny. Again, 100 years ago, they designed this, Albert. Nobody took a pen to correct it since then. Meanwhile, the 12th district is like the world's third largest economy. I figured nothing infuriates Californians more than looking at this geographic boundaries of Federal Reserve districts. I know, it's terrible. Obviously, New Mexico was so powerful, they had to split us between two separate reserve districts. Hawaii wasn't a state in 1913. Are they just tacking on a District 12? Marsha, you're right. As you note, both Hawaii and Alaska became states in 1959. And as a consequence, what that means is they were tacked on there, but so's Guam, not a state yet. American Samoa's there. We've got, and then meanwhile, to your point, Marcia, Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands are part of District 2. So territories matter too, but just not significant. I mean, kind of, but not enough. One of those awkward relationships the United States has with different sub-regions. Tradition is just peer pressure from the dead, Colin. You're absolutely right. President Taft is somewhere saying, yeah, California, know your place. Galbert says, so if you live in New Mexico in the 10th district, but do business in the 11th, you might be making one. That's true. That's absolutely true. And right here, so Albuquerque's right here. I live in Santa Fe. I commute to Albuquerque. All of my family's from my dad's side from California. But, today we had a dust warning. It's like living inside of a Mad Max simulator. It's an immersion program for the Mad Max franchise. But we're right here. The boundaries actually, Albuquerque is in one district, but then the county south of that is in a different district, which is very interesting to think about. Aaron, Las Cruces need not show up to the 10th. It's good. Oh, good job for you. I'm always impressed at your geographical knowledge in New Mexico. Aaron says, nothing as fun as central banking when you study Econ 740, central banks, macroeconomic policy, and the financial markets. The book, Central Banking Theory and Practice by Alan Blinder. That is a good book. Good advice for this as well, and a solid way to show how markets work in this respect. It is an important and interesting dialogue to have with how we work on things. Sorry, deleted too many things, just the top level. So what's going on right now? There's fewer industries hiring as we enter wait and see mode. So this is interesting. So one of the indices that BLS tracks is the Employment Diffusion Index. So basically this means that 50% indicates an equal balance between industries with increasing and decreasing employment. And so the observation we made earlier that, hey, wait a second, it looks like the sectors are quite evenly matched as in terms of sectors that are gaining and losing employment. We are now at a level where most sectors were gaining employment, now to a level where it's about 50-50. And obviously, when it's down here in this negative level, or down in the 30s and 20s and 10s, that means like in COVID, no industries were gaining jobs. But then also in 2008, only 15% were. Election season. Election season is, of course, its own job as it comes out to these things. Other things to look at. So this is also interesting. So temporary layoffs. So temporary layoffs have been a fascinating discussion into this. And one aspect that I do want to point out over the numbers that we saw last month was the weather effects, particularly with Hurricane Beryl, as it barreled down into Texas and was responsible for the majority of these July 2024 weather impacts. That included a whole bunch of people who were unable to work and had their hours reduced. Yeah, so take that, California firms who moved to Texas. And this was a significant impact, and we don't know precisely what that did to the jobs numbers, but it likely didn't help, and it likely drove them somewhere farther south than we would have seen otherwise. And that's interesting to note. Now, I had a couple of interesting questions about real estate in general. I want to talk about that too. Actually, there's a couple of things. Let me back up a little bit here. So one question, so I'll start off here first as well. One question that we received, I've heard people say it's a buyer's market for employers. Look at this, just shopping around. If so, when do you think it'll be a buyer's market for employees? were there predictions of a recession, but I don't see an indication of one. And when do you think there'll actually be a recession? Now, the whole game that we're talking about depends on what the Fed's going to do in the next couple months. Will they successfully unwind and bring us down to a lower rate? Those lower rates will help power growth aspects of the economy and investment in ways that can help us forward. That would be really interesting to see. But it doesn't mean, even if they're slow on this, it doesn't mean we'll be in a recession. For instance, one large investment bank came out, they said that the odds of a recession have gone up from about 26% to 41%. I think that that's probably fair. It depends a lot on a number of things. I don't think we're there yet, and I think that even though we're in a declining economy, there's a big difference between an economy that's deteriorating a little bit and one that is within the bounds of a recession. So I don't think we're there yet, and it's still an open question of whether we'll even get there. I think that a buyer's market for employees, a buyer's market for employers. Right after COVID, when we had a surge of stimulus funding, many sectors like leisure and hospitality couldn't hire workers fast enough, but these were often lower wage jobs. And so as a consequence, the wages in these sectors increased. And so I would say for employees in leisure and hospitality, it was very much a pro-employee market at that time. And then, of course, a lot of things changed. For some sectors, it never really emanated that way. The financial services sector, for instance, never really started a mass rehire again, and they've been in a little bit of a bind. And then information, of course, over the last couple of years has been very disappointing, and as a consequence, for a lot of different reasons. But we're looking at a situation where even these groups are in a position to be like, well, this is definitely an employer market rather than an employee market. And so right now, we're in a situation where it is increasingly an employer market. And I would say over the last 2 years, we've seen a steady increase in the level of an employer market that we have. And there's nothing that's going to turn this around until we lower these rates and initiate some very important objectives towards economic growth. What indicators are there that the economy might turn around for better? That's a really interesting question. So one of the reasons that we're not in disaster mode, and one of the reasons that we are still okay, is that stuff like mortgages. So about 60% of households have a mortgage in them. It's a bit lower in the San Francisco City County combo. It's about 50%. And most of those mortgages are in turn, or some of those mortgages are mortgaged, and many of those, to Aaron's point, are actually owned outright, where they have a significant benefit in them. And so when you have this taking place, we see a lot of comforting data from real estate right now. They're not in a stressful situation. Rates are high. It's very disappointing to be a first-time buyer right now. So in the most expensive times in the last 40 years to actually buy a house for the first time. But when we look at other things, we don't see a lot of negative credit quality, which is not an indication that the economy might turn around for better, but it's a source that it's not as bad as it seems at this moment. But then stuff like job losses could affect this. Now I want to address the question I received. What do recent inflation and job numbers mean for housing? If you have reserves and a stable income, is there an opportunity for buying? Well, a person in finance will always tell you that somewhere there's an undervalued property, there's always an opportunity there. But the question is to you is that what is the time and what should you do around this? We know that even when the whispers of Fed yields starting coming down, and we looked at some futures markets ahead of time, those 10-year Treasury yields dropped, and that sent mortgage rates down into the 6% level for the first time in a couple years. Now, in mortgages right now, only 1.8% of mortgages are underwater right now, meaning that people owe more money than their actual property is worth. Now, there's a lot of really terrible economic reasons for why this is. A lack of building, new construction, other things, zoning, all that stuff put together. Put that together over a number of years, you got into a situation where very few people have negative equity. This is a loan-to-value ratio, loan-to-value. So the loan is the amount of money that you take out for a property versus the actual value of the property. And hopefully this is well-scaled, and I have to check the source from CoreLogic. But it's not just a zestimate. So you're sitting on, I'm sitting on $8 million of equity for a property I bought in, in Chico. Now the percent of loans, only 8% of loans have about 50 to 54% LTV. That means that in 8.9% of mortgages, the property value of 600,000, let's say, the mortgage value in that would be around 300,000. So it's not bad. And so it's still pretty good. And only 1.8% of people are underwater. Also, foreclosures and bankruptcies. still below pre-pandemic levels. And that's kind of the source of hope. We haven't seen this is a trend upward. You can kind of see that right here from 21 quarter four upward, but it's not anywhere near the issues we had in 06, 07, 08. Also, high credit scores are what mortgages are made of now. So I'm not worried about the real estate market this way because we're booking loans, unlike in 06, where we're like, light it up. You got a pulse? Let's put you in the market. And now in 2024, it's much more like, yes, please come in, and everyone who has this is putting 20% down, and they have an 815 credit score, and they're just making this happen. Mortgage applications, though, and this is also its own version of a self-fulfilling prophecy. The market is so limited now for buyers across all income segments that only people in a strong fiscal position can afford to buy a house, which is why we've seen the mortgage applications, the number of people who actually apply for a mortgage has just tanked. It's fallen off the list. And so our mortgage application index is the lowest we've seen since 1995, which I remember, but some of you actually may not. And that is fascinating. Christopher says, due to the high cost of the house, especially of a lot of new homeowners, they become house poor. Inflation needs to significantly cool down along with interest rates and mortgages. Absolutely right, too. House costs to extend beyond the question of mortgages. They include things like house insurance, which, like car insurance, has gone up quite substantially in the last couple of years. California, in a recent survey, in a recent report, I don't have it here, but actually, let me grab it for you quickly. There was some discussion about things like home insurance and the cost of home insurance, and it is increasing in many areas of the country to levels that are quite prohibitive, particularly if you're along the Gulf Coast. It's really, really, really tight right now, and your increases can become cost prohibitive. In this Arbor data science graphic, I'm going to show you in 1 second here, this shows you the average home insurance rates as it pertains here. Look at this. So in Florida, just an extraordinary sum, $11,000, $12,000 a year, much higher than in California, which, the occasional earthquake aside, much safer from a risk point of view than other places. There's a lot of reasons for this. One of the reasons that are pointed out is that the costs of rebuilding have increased, material costs have increased, construction costs have increased, and also the presence of liabilities. Other issues like this, climate change, other things, have improved to a level where it's become harder and more expensive to maintain an adequate assessment of liability risk. One quote, those with the mortgage rates below 3% say their likelihood of moving in the next 3 years would soar from 17 to 28 if they could keep their current loan. Not rocket science, but it shows you why there isn't a lot of movement and churn in the marketplace, because people are trapped with the homes that they have. And so this is really interesting. Oh, let me go back up here as well. Albert says, insurance companies leaving California in droves. Fire danger everywhere. Absolutely true. Christopher says, Florida's experiencing issues with insurance companies too. Bam, absolutely right. Colin says, insurance is just a gamble you never hope to win. Colin taking the position of course, the host sitting on his back porch and his front lawn yelling at the kids on his lawn. But you're absolutely right. Christy says, all the above. And yeah, Albert, the insurance companies bailing on the fire insurance is killing this in the danger zones. True, too. Rukshan says, my condo building's insurance was not renewed. Oh, no. We have little wildfire risk here in San Francisco. Opportunists. Oh, that's so frustrating. So you're in an area, you're looking around saying, I live in a condo in a city, in a large metropolitan area. There's not going to be a wildfire anytime soon. But to your point, absolutely true. My goodness. Aaron says, one of the issues is family formation has fallen. That's interesting too. Look at this drop too. Households by age of the householder, of course, a lot more older householders, young adult householders have been pretty steady since 1980. Albert says insurance is a cartel. If you use it, they raise your rates. If you don't use it, they abandon you anyway. That's true. Aaron says, without people forming partner or pair bonded family formation, the savings rate is 50%. That's a complex statement. I'll have to analyze separately. I'll be like, I say that, I'll yell at my 10-year-old son. If I didn't have a 10-year-old son, I'd have 50% saving rate. Christopher says in Sarasota, of course, west coast of Florida on the Gulf. Florida, many homes flooded that were, let me go back a bit here. Yep, that were in non-flood zones. It was like a swamp. Hurricane damages caused people to move out of Florida. Not having flood insurance is terrible for a homeowner in Florida, 100%. You got to do what you got to do, but it's become so expensive. It adds, of course, to your aggregate costs. So insurance is going to be, it's interesting as well. One of the things, yeah, gosh, I'd never listened to my math teacher in middle school who's like, you should be an actuary. And I'm like, oh, actuary, I want to do something else. But actuaries, of course, looking at liability risk and things. Insurance has a long storied history, the Great Fire of London in 1666 led us to fire insurance. Nicholas Barebones created the first fire office. And insurance is heavily reliant on data. And so you need a lot of data about a lot of different things to assess what is the cost of this to repair. And as a consequence, then when insurance companies calculate your premium, they're taking in all of these different factors about risk that is known to them. And there's been an explosion of data around this, and they update these models depending on cost increases across the system. Thanks, Christy. Low standards are what I value here in these economic chats. Manifest equity. So the one issue of concern is it's not all great. If you're sitting in a homeowner, of course it's not great. Nothing's great. Your insurance has just been canceled. You can't get fire insurance. You're sitting around at this, looking at this, saying, my goodness, what's going to happen next? People are actually tapping home equity loans, despite it being a much more expensive time to do so. They are taking out more of them, not catastrophically more like in 06, 07, 08, but they're taking out more of them. That means to keep up with the consumption. And again, consumption's 2/3 of the US economy. Don't hate the player, hate the game. I'm buying things right now. Things. We're at this level where home equity is now a significant source of potential future consumption for Americans. And as they tap into this, they lower those LTVs and they risk putting them in water if we did have a real estate correction. Although I don't foresee that happening anytime soon. Ba-dum-bum-bum. Next, non-residential construction by state, put in place by state. Now, this is another story. So one of the other sources of hope, to get back to my person who's like, where is the hope? Show me the hope. Is we have private non-residential construction put in place by state. 2023, this is CHIPS Act, this is IRA stuff, this is all this stuff. So CHIPS Act helped encourage the building of stuff like manufacturing facilities, onshoring of a lot of different things in the United States. We have seen that, not incidentally so much in California, but we've seen that in many other states in the country, a tendency to build more manufacturing firms in this country than before. And that has been help. Rukshan says, without insurance, your mortgage lender might not service your loan. Also true. One of the worst things, you can't take advantage of this. This is absolutely true. There's spitting wisdom here, Rukshan. I appreciate that. You're absolutely right. So we got this as well. So good news is that the manufacturing firms, even though manufacturing jobs were downwardly corrected, the amount of investment in manufacturing stuff has gone up substantially. Put in a different way, if we did this per capita, a lot of states have done this, but states have been highly variable in this. Some of this is the way that these laws were constructed, but a lot of times these companies have taken advantage of certain laws and rules in certain states that don't exist in others. A lot of red states versus blue states took advantage of some of these gains, being from North Dakota, Texas, or Idaho as examples, and even down here in Colorado and New Mexico, we've got some cooking there too. So it's interesting. A lot of different states affected this differently. Per capita spending. Where's California on this? All the way down here at the bottom. It's not even worth graphing. Not enough. When you divide by 40 million people, it's not a substantially high number. But you're talking about between $1,000 and $4,000 for a lot of different states in non-residential construction that has been happening in the last couple years, which is really, really interesting. Now, Aaron brought up an interesting link, so this is cool. Christopher says, inflation first hit renters, now it's affecting homeowners. Absolutely, we're seeing it across the board too. And inflation, of course, shelter costs are a delayed metric. So when we look at inflation data, even when inflation, drop below 3% to 2.9, shelter is often lagging. Because of the nature of how the shelter is imputed, or that cost of shelter is computed. Aaron says the construction market is too fragmented and land is too developed, and land for development is too concentrated. Aaron sent me a really compelling link, actually. Aaron, can you drop that link in the chat? I think people should read it. I meant to incorporate this a lot more than I did so far. I think it's a worthwhile read for people as well. So Aaron popped in this link about the construction market, and there's a lot of decisions about this. So I'm long-term decision. I'm always like, zoning's a big issue. We got to fix it. But as Aaron points out, we have a high amount of concentration in just a few builders. And these builders then operate inefficiently in a cartel-like fashion and kind of limit construction in very meaningful ways that can have negative effects on prices. So again, this is a big deal. And Albert says, once again, I'm asking California to reform. And this is so hard because California, of course, is full of people who are making historic movements to try to make stuff cheaper and working so hard. And then they open a door and then, or open a window and then, a door is closed on them again. Thanks, Aaron, for sharing that as well. That's excellent. So other aspects of the economy that are worth talking about in this level too. It's the land, says Aaron. And he's absolutely right. Land is a premium, and it's really tough, especially in areas with scarce resources, East and West Coast in particular. But land everywhere is kind of expensive to turn out. I'm not even living in this. I mean, I used to be able to buy when I buy, a huge amount of, even rural land is not as cheap as you might think it should be in these situations. Grocery industries, indeed. So some notes about food and inflation. So as many of you know, that food away from home has gone up about 4% in the last year. Food at home has gone up only 1%. Some of these effects we're seeing in groceries right now, grocery stores. So same store sales growth and profit margins have actually fallen back to pre-pandemic levels. Both peaked in 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic. But then since that time period, we've seen the profit levels relatively drop. You're like, well, wait a second here. If my margin, a 2% profit margin in a grocery store sounds like, are they making these numbers up? It is a pretty tight market. And not all grocery markets are competitive. There was that decision, especially with the, Albertsons, Kroger, merger. If you're in many states or many cities and you're served by one grocery store or two grocery stores, it actually shows you that these grocery stores take advantage of that situation and their margins are higher and there's less competition for consumers. But in competitive grocery markets like big cities or a lot of big cities, you have seen overall the tendency for profit margins to drop. Christopher says, when high wage earners are struggling to pay rent or go into homeownership, we're in big trouble. New York City residents, due to high cost of living, crime, and immigration issues, absolutely true. That's interesting. Struggling to pay rent or go into homeownership. And that's really interesting. Housing is something that should be available for everybody, and not housing merely in the rental sense, but housing in the equity sense. And we need to do significantly more to make this cheaper, because right now it is terrible in this market for housing. And you go abroad, and I was like, okay, let's go to other urban centers globally. This is an Anglosphere thing, as it turns out. The Financial Times pointed this out. If you go to, say, East Asia or parts of, other parts of Europe or other parts of even large developed cities. And I was in Osaka in March, and I was explaining this to me before. And I think last month, and I was asking, students, what are you paying for rent? And it ends up being like $400, $500 a month. And it's an extraordinary thing because Osaka is a city the size of New York City. It is a gigantic city. I'm meaning some of that 1% increased food, Aaron. Good job, Aaron. Food in a bag. That's right. Put a little bit of there, a little bit of corn chips, some miscellaneous surprise dinner at Champions. I appreciate that, Aaron. Christopher says a co-host on the TV show The View stated she put an onion back because it was $4.99 just for one onion. Inflation's hurting many people all over. Absolutely true, Christopher. Aaron says Singapore model 60K for bottom 33% economically, get a grant for a down payment. So even other countries, even Singapore, which has a premium on land, indeed a city state, has potential available for you to sit there and potentially make some equity. So that's an interesting thing. Is that an onion from Whole Foods, Albert says? That's right. I don't know. One of those things. I don't know. There's Whole Foods onions they're very tasty, but they're there. There's a cost to them. I'm more of a, I don't know what the equivalent is. I'm a Big Lots onion guy. It's that. I don't know if that's a thing. What's in? Oh man, what a time to be alive. Other good news, though, if somebody wanted good news, I know we had another request for good news. Used car prices. Bougie onions. Yes. Fetch me another one of those onions. Belvedere, and then you ride away on your horse. U.S. used car prices have been going down slightly since 2022. Does it still feel expensive for used cars? Of course it does. But because we're humans, normal people don't have a one-year memory like economists do. And so we look at price increases, we're like, it has been higher over the last 4 years. And you're right. But the tendency now is we're seeing a decline in car prices here, which are significant. Now, on this level, is the Fed going to cut? How much? And what are the markets going to say? So tendency is, yes, they're going to cut. And this is kind of a market prediction I pulled this week, looking at the FedWatch tool of what the market thinks will happen. So basically, there's a 75% chance of like a 25 basis point cut. A basis point is 0.11 of a percent. So 25 basis points is 0.25%. And a 26% chance the Fed will drop it by 0.5%. And then going forward, the market thinks we'll end up next year with federal funds rates in summer right around somewhere around 3.5%. Now, the market does a terrible job at this. This is a terrible thing of predicting, and often even predictive markets in this level are often very surprised. But in this case, this is a really, really big deal. Aaron says use Japanese and Korean cars and it will rock for 10 years. I'm rocking one that has 232,000 miles. Actually, an American car. I don't know how it's alive. It's magic that keeps it alive. Whimsy, one might add. I've just, a lot of duct tape. Christy says Trader Joe's has better prices. And at least compared to Safeway and Whole Foods. Agreed, Christy. Big Trader Joe's fan here. I buy the pizza ingredients, make the pizzas, get the quattro formaggio. Excellent choice if you're making your own pizza there. Christopher says multiple news segments on high wage earners. Talked about that. That's true. Larger cities are not for everyone to live in, but they could be, is the point. That's the point I would like to make. Christy says their prices tend to stay lower because they buy directly from suppliers and manufacturers, cutting out brokers and distributors. Nice. Aaron says world-class engineering, and that's true too. Oh man, Albert dropping on this. Look at us talking about the ins and outs of the grocery market. We've never seen that yet in Albert's list, so this is exciting to see. Going in and out on groceries. So Fed's going to cut, we suspect, but where it goes from there is highly dependent on a lot of unknown factors, like how the economy is doing. If the Fed starts cutting and the job market continues to decline, they're going to cut more. And so that's going to be an interesting thing to pan out. Keep an eye on this, though. What this means, though, is that if you're a company and you're looking to invest, you're going to want to invest capital when it's cheaper to get capital. And I suspect that could come down here as well. If done correctly and done the right way, this can be an engine for growth in the future. Now, immigration. It's been good for our economy. It's been really good. It helps us attracting a lot of immigrants. It helped fill a lot of jobs that we couldn't fill post-COVID-19 recession. However, this appears to be going away. Goldman Sachs Global Investment Research points out that our incremental effect of above-trend immigration is going away, and as a consequence, we're not going to recognize those higher-than-average job numbers, and it's going to be a little bit trickier in the economy going forward. Look at this. You guys are sharing coupons as well. This is adorable. I just love the spirit of collegiality inside of the Albert's List marketplace. Share these things. Aaron's going to send us some clippings. Christopher, Aldi's very affordable. I'm not going to lie. I love Aldi. I think it's the most magnificent place on earth. Look at this place. I can buy, what is this? What is this made out of? I don't know, but I know it's very cheap. And that's true too. And you have this sort of sense of different things. Now, AI, and this is an interesting thing as well. So we had a question about this come up, and I wanted to address this in a formal way. Is AI advancement driving the economic crisis? Is it driving the economic crisis is my question. And so let's think about this. Is it a boom in AI? Yes, it's a boom in a lot of places. Telecom bubbles, railway mania, shale revolution in time. AI euphoria all saw growth. Does it mean it will end tomorrow? It does not. But what does happen is at the start of every bubble, the market is naive to a question and they try to find, and money flows in from all corners. And the market tries to figure out and says, okay, which of these companies are going to actually turn this into something that generates revenue? Now we know railways, some railroads in the 1840s made money. We know the telecom companies that were successful post cell phone revolution that we still have around today. And we know the shale revolution, the oil companies that benefited from that. That's a little bit of a different story because they're dealing with a finite resource. And even though that's improved technology, it's been a mixed bag for a lot of those companies. And AI is no different in the sense that we have to figure out, the market does not know yet which firms employing AI are going to make money, how they're going to make money from it. And so as a consequence, until it does, it's going to be noisy with a lot of ups and downs, but I don't think in itself It is the cause of our current economic crisis or stress. Tulip bubble in the 1630s. Albert dropping the bubbles. You know, I wrote an article about that. I wrote an article about cryptocurrency. And of course, in crypto a few years back, you had to compare it to the tulip bubble. And then I wrote a whole bunch about the tulip bubble. And that's really fun. Are we still in crypto bubble? We're not, are we? What's going on with crypto? That's true. Still owns them. Marcia says Albert's list money saving tips and recipe sharing. Oh, I love it. Look at this. You guys are great. You guys can have a book club after this. This is gonna be great. Costco bounty in the freezer. I was at Costco last weekend. I rock and rolled that thing. Paying off that membership. Gotta do this. I can feed myself and my whole family for the next 6 months. Christy says, you know, Costco's good for families. It's more challenging as an individual. That's also true. Colin says, aren't we still in the crypto bubble? Aaron says, Aldi, Whole Foods, Friday sales, Amazon Prime discount 20%. This is great. This is what this is. Look at these rewards happening. You guys are hilarious. Okay, so we got a few things here. We've got some other questions. Would love to understand what kind of businesses still thrive in the current state of the economy. Healthcare, doing great. Why? People are getting older. People are getting more expensive. In the United States, much as we try to throw things at the wall, do not have any coherent answer when it comes to healthcare reform or healthcare expense reform. So a lot of investments going this way from private equity to otherwise, and that's why we've seen growth in healthcare. So that is what's happening in the current state of the economy. What types of jobs can I prepare for in the next 2 quarters? Teaching and project management experience. I love this. So it's like a rainbow of experience. Arts, teaching, school administration, project management. So the question is, how risk averse are you? How much money do you want to make? Project management is always going to be part of the overall sphere. If it's a competitive amount of project management experience, that's a door opener across the board to a lot of different sectors. I think school administration, teaching, and arts, if they're all related as part of that subcategory, those are always going to be things as well. I mean, I'm a chair of a board of a charter school. I wasn't big on charter schools until I went through a program, and now I'm like, oh, those make sense. But a lot of opportunities to improve educational wherewithal across the country right now, especially if you've got the administration wits about you. I think both of those actually will not change drastically in the next 2 quarters. I think companies will likely consolidate in a weakening job market around questions of project management. And so that's a really interesting thing. My goodness gracious. Oh God, get some credit cards, points. We're talking about this, Bitcoin mining. This is good. Get your points. Christopher used to go to food banks a lot. That's true. That's true. Growing up, that's the jam. Christy, Patricia, feel free to use webinar chat. There you go. Patricia Brown, that appears to be oh, that's exciting. Okay, well, that's an inappropriate series of comments. Thank you, Patricia. Christy, Albert, wow, I haven't had a racist spammer in a long time. Gosh, darn it. Anyway, how's everyone else doing? Thank you for not spamming me. We haven't had that in a while. I haven't seen a real spammer on a public discourse like this since, God, where was I? I did a crypto presentation, actually, back a few years back for a different group. Yeah, thanks, Albert. Thank you for saving the day. Wow. Oh, man, that's great. That's horrifying. Thank you guys for sticking around through that. Anyway, my apologies that had to happen. How significant is dividends to stock performance? Another question. Oh, this is going to burst your bubble. So as it turns out, I'm going to teach you a little bit of finance today. This is a little cut. So after I explain this to you, you'll technically qualify for an MBA. I'm going to show you actually the dividend valuation model. We're just going to do this. So long story short, oh man, I got to show you this one. So finance as an entity, as an academic entity, has been studying stock market movement for decades. And decades ago, a formula was invented to describe what a stock price is. And so again, for the people in the cheap seats, what I'm answering a question that I received before today's session. And this is, how significant is dividend to stock performance and investor confidence? And so that's the question. So let's answer this out here, do a little street finance, and I'll print you all out an MBA if you make it through. Really quick, easy thing. So a long time ago, we had this formula came out that described the price of a stock. It's called the Gordon growth model. And does it actually work? The best part about finance is. We wrote a lot of papers saying it does, a lot of papers saying it doesn't. Yeah, it's finance. So the idea being is that any stock price right now at time zero today is based off of next year's dividend divided by whatever the discount rate of the market is minus the growth rate. And so the growth rate's the growth rate of the company you expect it will generate over the long run. And the discount rate is how much you're discounting this future value by. We all got one. If I asked you a question that said, hey, would you like $1,000 today or $1,000 in a year? You're going to be like, Reilly, send me that $1,000 check today. But if I said to you, would you prefer $800 today or $1,000 in a year? Some of you would be like, you're running little calculations in your head. You'd be like, Reilly, what's Reilly's risk? Will he pay this off? How do I know he's actually tenured and won't be kicked out of his establishment and not able to pay me my $1,000? Maybe I should still take the $800 today. We're making all the time implicit discount rate calculations. Anytime when we take a future value and discount it by some value in our head to some equivalent amount today, we're using a discount rate. So the stock price is itself based on dividends. But you're probably also saying to yourself, well, hold the phone, Reilly. Only about half of S&P 500 companies or less actually give dividends. How could this possibly be a basis of stock valuation when a lot of companies just don't give dividends? And that's how finance, in our epic wisdom, in our sitting on top of Mount Finance, we thought about this in great detail. And we said, if a company isn't going to give a dividend now, or isn't doing it right now, it will at some point in the future. Be it Amazon, be it a growth company, be it even LinkedIn. No dividend now, dividend sometime in the future. And then we can use that, even if it happens 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line, to create a valuation strategy that looks just like this one. And so dividends are really significant for stock valuation because there are two ways we make money in stocks. The price of the stock goes up in value, or two, it gives us a cash flow. Not all stocks do this. So dividends are really important, particularly from our perspective. So what do you have to think about this way? What happens in different cycles? A lot of people prefer dividend-paying stocks as generators of income. A lot of people push back and buy growth stocks that don't offer dividends but pour their money back into building new products and services in growth times to maximize big returns. Your philosophy can vary between these things or go back and forth. It is a really, really good question. Oh, it's Marcia's question. That's right. Hey, she says, it's my question. I asked because my company recently decided to stop paying out its dividend. It's been challenging. Did the stockholders like it, Marcia? Did you feel comfortable when you looked at your stock holdings at the price? And this is an interesting thing. The level of damage that not paying a dividend does depends on how investors feel the company's future is going to pan out. If they think, oh, this is just a year-long thing and they'll pay me a dividend again, probably not too big of an effect. If this is goodbye dividends, that ship has sailed, it'll have a bigger effect on the stock market performance. But it is a negative thing. And as Marcia's pointed out, I'm so sorry, it is a big effect in the long run. It doesn't mean, though, that your company itself is not worth investing in. There could be other reasons for it. Also, too, as well, if you do whatever your company is and however you own it, we do encourage people in the behavioral finance side of it to not put all their eggs in one basket. Do diversify your investments whenever possible, because it will generate a better risk return optimality for you probably. Aaron says, why buying a zero load SPX SP 500 fund and forget about it for 20 to 50 years is the key. That's true. I got a bunch of SPX funds. I'm on that thing. That is an ETF, by the way, and you can buy these things. You can buy ETFs, exchange traded funds that follow the entire market. And we know the market in the long run typically goes up. The average long-term growth of the S&P 500 is about 10 or 11%, depending on whether you use a geometric or arithmetic average, since the 1920s. And so if you buy a stock that represents the whole market, you tend to do well in the long run. But that's not something, I'm not registered to give you investment advice, but it is generally the theory about how these things work. Yes, so Intel and I think stopped its dividend given everything has been gone through recently. Intel, of course, we have a big plan out here. Of course, Intel has layoffs. And of course, have also done a lot of investment. And so it's a very, very interesting thing. Oh, man. So this is good. Yes, ETF doesn't generate tax events for SPX. Tax events. My whole life is a tax event, Aaron. That's very interesting. So I love these questions. So I hope that answers that a little bit, Marcia. So in short, it is, but it's not the end all. Our valuations typically come from some level of the dividend growth model, but it's not the only way we value stocks. And ultimately, your stock performance will go up or down depending on the fundamentals of whether your company is going to make money in the future or not. AI advancement we talked about. What are your predictions for the state of the job market last quarter of 2024? I think even if we raise rates, we're still going to see the job market kind of decline a bit. We're seeing some continued, even if we lower rates, I'm sorry, the job market won't turn around tomorrow. Looking at San Francisco and San Jose, we saw unemployment rates tick up from 3.5% to 4.2 and 4.1 in June. I suspect that trajectory also went up, but it's very noisy data. We saw, for instance, a drop in San Francisco government employment by like 13,000. And then we also saw small drops across the board in a bunch of different sectors like education and health services, as well as even in manufacturing. Whereas in San Jose, it's been a little bit sunnier, as it is often in San Jose. But you've got a bunch of other numbers that are less promising, for instance. And I suspect what we're going to find, especially in government too, also showing noted declines in this area that has contributed to local amounts of unemployment rising. Government in particular, dropping between both cities, a total of 21,000 jobs. Shedding in the last month in between May and June. Significant numbers. Albert says, is it prudent that the job market may return next spring, summer? Must move X from San Francisco to San Jose too. Mid-market is dead again. Dun, dun, dun. So it's true. Will the job market return? Probably. Let's see. So let's play that out. Let's simulate that. Fed lowers rates. And even if they lower rates aggressively, it's going to take at least a year to feel a lot of those different effects in different parts of the economy. I don't think the job market may turn around. I think our best case next year, stabilization and perhaps hopefully in the direction of some other things. Aaron says rates are going to fall 2% the next 2 to 3 years. Unemployment will get to 5% early next year. Aaron's more precise. I agree with this, actually. We'll hit 5 for sure. And then go back to 3% by the end of 26. I think on the back of rate cuts, I think Aaron's prediction is probably the way to go. Christopher says, do you know your way to San Jose? Diane Warwick, do you know your way to San Jose? Diane Warwick. No, unfortunately, there's too much traffic. I gave up. So one of the next things are one of those. Oh, my goodness. So, okay. So we got that, we got this. Christy says, we're going to continue to see employers. Oh, Christy, good question. We're going to continue to see employers undercut offers for hiring and expect more for less. Yes, Christy, because the job market's going to get tighter and employers know it, and they're going to ask more of you with consequently less wage increases than we've seen in the last couple of years. And that's kind of what we're doing. Not a sunny outlook as it stands right now, but it is the outlook at least over the next, I'd say, year or so. And then it's too far out to see what happens. I got another question from the audience beforehand. Dr. White, given the current economic conditions and trends, what key indicators should we be monitoring closely over the next 6 to 12 months and to understand the trajectory of the economy, its potential impact on industries like healthcare, biotech, AI, and government? So given the current economic conditions and trends, we're going to have to follow a few things. It'll be interesting, particularly, of course, elephant in the room is the election. Who gets elected and what economic policies come out of that, and the mandate that that particular party has will have a lot of effects on where we're going to go from here, I suspect. Even though politics in general, presidents are often only accessories to macroeconomic events at times, I think it does lay the communication that comes out of that dictates a lot about how the market's going to shape up in the next bit of time. Oh, man. Albert says, with all this stuff happening, soft landing, hard landing. Right now, I'm still hoping for soft landing right now. I still think that's most likely as a scenario, but we'll have to follow how these job markets work. Aaron says, 3% interest rate and unemployment policy. I made this up. That's good. That's why you're in economics. This is what you do. We throw numbers at the wall, we make it up, and then people are like, tell us what the numbers will be. And I'm like a broken clock is still right twice a day. Anyone have a hope token to spare? Anyone have Albert? Albert has a hope coupon. If you have one of those, Aaron will email you some hope. But that's what we got. So we got this going on. We got our numbers here. We're at 7:15, and I think we got it. So we're good. Thank you all for hanging around for this show. Final question, Colin, weave us a tale.
Do Well, I mean, like, we often get together once a month, paint a tale of the doom and gloom. Inflation's going up, and this freaking yesterday is like, oh, 800
Is there
jobs.
any good news, right?
Yeah, is there any good news? Like,
Oh yeah,
Is
what
yeah. It's
consumer
not as
what's
bad
spending
as
good that's
up?
that.
Is
coming down the
manufacturing
pipeline?
up? Are new
Oh,
factories opening anywhere?
oh yeah. I mean, we're still spending well. I mean, overall, we still got factories opening, but aggregates are always bad things. There's still hope. The sun still shines. We've got
You know?
green
Is
grass and the
Jerome Powell
occasional
still
bird.
putting ice in his lemonade, or
That's
does he,
right. That's right. Sitting on the porch making declarations about how hot it is. That's what we're about here.
yeah,
So,
the ice rule, right? If Jerome Powell doesn't have cold
oh,
lemonade, the economy's
Jimmy
gone
points
bad.
out. So to this point about when was the last time this happened, a soft landing would be a trick to pull off with an inverted yield curve like it had been for some time, and it would be the first time we've done that in modern economic sense in the last 50 years. So here's hoping. It's a
Yeah.
good question. I don't know, but it's still good news. It's not all bad news. We could be in a worse spot. We're still seeing declines in credit quality, but it's not accelerating beyond a reasonable level. We're still seeing strength in overall people. If you own a home, that equity is a pool of resources for a lot of folks. So it's a complex picture, as it always is. But your mileage may vary depending on your own set of individual experiences through this.
Yeah.
Oh man, all these good questions here. It's good talking about lemonade. Oh, lemonade. Oh, the bitter sour tears of that's really interesting. That's pretty funny. Yes, also be bitter and sour. Make lemonade out of your own tears. That's a positive thing to look at. You can sell it in Whole Foods. Will have it available for purchase. Christopher says, if we suspend foreign aid, could this help by reinvesting in affordable housing and homeownership? What an interesting politically charged statement. So yeah, so we could. One of the things that's really hard about anything in government systems anywhere else is there's a tendency for us to say, if we cut all these things, we cut the space program, or we did this, or cut foreign aid, and we invested back in. All of those things are part of a broader whole of strategic initiatives that do pay off ultimately for the United States, because a lot of things are tied together. So in many cases, foreign aid, are what we would call economic diplomacy in that regard. It's not completely altruistic on our end. It does have advantages to us, sometimes in trade, jobs, and other agreements. And so that needs to be studied in greater detail. Two, and Aaron says focus on seasonal vets and fruits because they're always the best deal. Frozen proteins. God, they are doing recipes and good. Yeah, I got this, got some. What's in season now? Just, frozen strawberries every day, all 3 meals. Melanie says we're not in war with Russia, China, and Iran yet. Yeah, not yet. Albert says we're doing this webinar again next month on 26th. Thank you guys. Please join us. And we're dumpster diving. Okay, I'll let you guys go. Sorry, Albert and Colin, take it away. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything.
Oh, we're still commenting on things. I think it's good. So, what do we watch for what do we watch for in the next month, right? We have a presidential debate where maybe there will be dueling economic visions presented. We have a jobs report in September, which will no doubt
Yes.
be of interest. We might get our first rate cut, which is important. We've got Powell tomorrow at Jackson Hole with all his rich
Yes.
hobnobbing buddies. And like, look, the last time the economy was bad in September 2008, we all woke up in the morning to the Dow dropping 700 to 800 points and a couple of banks going under. Will that happen?
So I can't say the best part is I know I'm not,
Yeah.
people always want, absolutist statements. That will not happen. If anything taught me about the economy, it always could. And so the biggest risk for us, to your point, Albert, is an unanticipated market risk of some kind. Now, the banks are they're in pretty good shape. We went through a series of re-leveraging, to your point, that put us in a better spot than a lot of Europe. And then further to that, the Treasury intervened when we were really in a banking crisis with the revaluation of all the treasuries that banks were holding back a little bit more than a year ago. And that put us in a spot of strength in our financial sector and gave a lot of hope for the future. So we look for these things because that's what we're trained to look for, because we lived through a banking crisis, right? And we
Yeah.
lived through these things. So our eyes are always open and saying this will look like something we saw before. It won't really, probably, not in this case. It could just be a plain old regular recession, which is that the economy continues to tumble a little bit. We end up with a quarter or two of negative economic growth, if that were the worst case situation, and then some adjustment period. What we have to figure out ultimately, though, to your point, point is what made us successful in the last COVID pandemic above any other G7 nation was the $5 trillion of stimulus spending. If we go back to 2008, in 2009, 2010, President Obama, responding to the Great Recession financial crisis, economic wisdom at the time was that, hey, we cut rates to zero. That should be enough of a stimulus. And as it turned out, it wasn't. And we spent years getting back to a position of growth. And so I would actually posit that our fear is less so on a correction that might happen in a year or two's time, and the nature and appetite that we have to invest in getting us out of that into a sustained position of growth. And even though we have this thing now where we say, oh, we throw lots of money at the situation, it can get us to grow quickly. The pendulum swings quickly the other way, and people become very fiscally concerned, I would say, around certain things. Oh, good comments here. There'll be a shift. Aaron's in predictive mode. I like when Aaron's eyes glaze over and then he sees the future. Aaron, there'll be a shift of tens of trillions of debt worldwide that will reprice starting next month. This will add hundreds of billions of credit every 90 days. That's exciting. Mortgage rates will go below 6% at the end of the year, and this will drive millions to the housing market. That's what I love about Aaron. He's right there. Bam. And Dem Senate candidates running ahead of presidential, though it seems Tester might actually keep Montana. Interesting to see how the election pans out and what the winning party can do with the economy afterwards.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
That's what I'm watching for. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah. And so those are good things to watch for the next month. Do you have any tips and advice for job seekers? I know you're an economics professor, but we always like to hear from you too.
Oh, thank you guys. I know the best part of being an academic is I get to like myself by the warm light of tenure. But in this particular case, it is tricky. Right now, you're going to find. So let me put it this way, and I'll point this out to you because I just met with one of our students for like an hour today, and he was telling me all these things, and he's trying to get a visa and trying to make these things happen. So we don't give up. Search for a broader umbrella of types of companies and jobs than you might otherwise expect. And ask someone else outside of your field, outside of your thing. Look, here's my experience. Where do you think I might be a good fit? Especially in a tightening job market, don't close the door on opportunities you just might not have thought of. And also to that same level, keep trying. If it's a hard market here, because you're looking in a 5-mile radius of Palo Alto for something, and you've got like a history of coding experience, you've just rocked and rolled it with project management, it's tough to say, but you can consider other markets that you might be a rock star in. And so keep an open mind and an open focus and do the best you can. And I'm going to root for you. Whatever it is.
Are you hiring for teacher's assistants for the
fall
God,
semester?
No,
like we can afford that. No, of course not. No, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. No, you're right. Jeez, what is this? No, one of those. We are actually. So one of the things we could, we don't pay enough for teaching assistants, but in your lecturer positions, if you got your colleges locally, adjuncts are grossly underpaid. But there are.
You already have 2 applicants. Melanie said you can pay her in groceries.
Oh, Melanie, let's put her on. Let's do this thing. Let's have it. Oh, Melanie and Christy, done. So get you guys hired. Let's do these things. We got a lot of online programs. Wherever you're at, we'll send that happen. That's not committal, by the way. I want to put a little thing right there. I'll be like, compliance. UNM will be like, Reilly, we were aware of a podcast you were on, and there's some things that you might have said. No, I can't promise yet, but I want to encourage you to apply. If you've seen an opening that you think you might be good at, get into a classroom and do it, because students
right at Los Alamos or at the University of New Mexico.
Yeah,
maybe the
Los
admissions
Alamos National
office
Labs. We got Sandia National Labs, which is the stepsister of
or I hear there are chemistry teacher openings in your area. Yeah.
That's right.
That's a Breaking Bad reference for all.
It could be Breaking Bad. I knew you were going to drop that in there, but yes. So anyway, yes, you could work for Sandy Labs, the stepsister of Lawrence Livermore. You got all these things here. You could be a chemistry. You could form your own meth cartel. I mean, the opportunities are endless here. We've got small disclaimers. Please move to jobs in the hinterland, Aaron says. They need skills. For example, why aren't you getting jobs in Kansas? Aaron, don't you live in Jersey? Cartel labs, isn't this a thing? Anyway, why are you Aaron will hire you. That's the point. He's got it right. LLC, smart. You got to protect your liability risk there, Aaron. You got to make sure that you put a limited liability company on that.
Oh yeah, and then buy lots of insurance.
That's right. Only the ones you can afford.
Only the one that you can afford. Yeah. All right. Well, cool. Thank you so much, Dr. White, and thank you all so much for joining. This has been recorded, so it's going to be on our YouTube page here, and we'll be able to send a follow-up. We've also shared next month's webinar, so please join us then. Hopefully, there won't be too many exciting fireworks, but if there are, you will hear about them, and we will analyze them after all the news people have freaked out. So you'll get the real news versus the hype. So best of luck with all of you for the next month ahead. We'll be in touch with everything going on, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you all, and have a wonderful evening. Bye.